There we go. Okay. Good morning, everyone. You have reached the Policy Leadership Academy. Thank you so much for joining us this Tuesday. We're super pleased you could join us, and happy Valentine's Day to everyone. And this is Module 2. So welcome to Module 2. Again, so pleased you could join us. If you could take a moment, I know I sound like a broken record, but we do need you to sign up. It's also our way that we were here, and it's also our records that that our trainings need. And so if you could sign up in the chat, my colleague Stephanie put the sign up sheet there. Take a moment to sign that. We appreciate it. Also choose your language. I'm going to ask my translator Carmen to just ask if you want to hear this presentation in Spanish. You can do so. So Carmen.
Buenos días. Buenos días a todos y bienvenidos a la reunión. Si quieren escuchar esta reunión en español, abajito en su tablero, si están en su computadora, van a mirar un símbolo del mundo. Allí mismo van a poder elegir su idioma de preferencia. Si están en un celular, una iPad o una tableta, van a mirar 3 puntitos donde dice More o Más, y allí mismo también van a poder elegir su idioma de preferencia, que sería el español. Muchas gracias.
Thanks, Carmen. And Carmen and Carlos are our translators today, if you needed to chat with them. If you have any questions. So the Leadership Academy brings together stakeholders, community residents to understand and address local, statewide, and federal issues through a shared common knowledge of causes and impacts, current problem-solving frameworks, and best practices and actions to address change with an emphasis on policy. So that's why we're all here. And our timeline, we're going to be together the whole month of February. We're going to be together the whole month of March and April. And so we'll be ending on April 25th. So you're together for another 11 weeks, although the week before the last is dark. We don't meet on that second to the last. Today, we're super excited to offer our speaker, David Kietzman, as the speaker. We're going to have him speak on strategic communication, and we are also going to be followed up with a Q&A. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my director, Sylvia, to introduce our speaker today, David Kietzman. Sylvia?
Thank you, Tracy. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, bienvenidos. Yes, we're very excited to have David Kietzman here with us. David is an expert in solving problems through communications. In the last 2 decades, he led 4 organizations and launched multiple social impact enterprises. He's received local and national recognition for his work and training from Los Angeles Social Venture Partners, from the Annberg Foundation, from New Leaders Council, and the Wells Fargo Executive Leadership Program. At the social impact marketing agency, Momentum Solutions, he plays the role of managing partner, leading much of their branding and marketing work. The work allows him to mix his creativity along with his leadership background and a professional coaching certification when working with their clients. Past clients range from family foundations, Fortune 1000 businesses, nonprofit organizations, to coaching individual leaders. He teaches courses in nonprofit fundraising, public thought leadership, and governance at Cal State Los Angeles in their Masters of Public Administration program. In addition, being a guest lecturer and a communications trainer at USC, UCLA, CSUN, First 5 LA, Executive Service Corps, and other institutions. In addition, he sits on several nonprofit boards in Southern California. When he isn't working, David enjoys exploring the many communities that make up the City of Angels with his family. Again, help me welcome David Kietzman.
Thank you, Sylvia. Good to see some of you. It's Happy Valentine's Day, as we're all saying. I'm just going to jump into it. So I'm going to share screen and we're going to get going. All right, so you should be able to see my screen now. We'll email this to the folks who want it after the presentation as well. Screen arranged. All right, so we're going to talk about just an overview of the next hour or so with you. First, we're going to do a little check-in discussion coming up, but then we're going to talk about strengthening your brand first through communications. I don't think jumping right into strategic communications, if you don't have some of your brand elements down as an organization, communication will be less impactful, right? And so we're going to talk about words and people and perceptions and different tactics around building your brand, and then talk about strategic communications, talking about different marketing platforms, tactics, social media, all that good stuff. Who are you speaking to? And how are you speaking to them under strategic communications? Feel free to ask questions throughout. So you can unmute yourself and jump in. You can drop questions in chat. I'm looking at the chat screen right now. You can raise your hand if you like that function. But hopefully folks can interact with me today and ask questions. And this is for you. Those flowers are from your hills. You should be having some super blooms coming up in the hills of the valley, whether you love them or hate them because of the traffic. They're beautiful. So with that, I'd love for everyone to spend a couple minutes thinking about this question, and then I'd love to hear from a couple of you. So what is one communications tactic that has worked for you or your organization over the last 2 years? And what's one tactic that's grown stale, that just doesn't work anymore? It's not as impactful. So think about the ways you communicate to people. That could be, I know everyone is at a different role, different organizations on the call, but just think about how you communicate with folks and what's been impactful and then what hasn't been impactful. I'll just give us a minute to think about that. I should have had some music ready. But if you already know, would love to hear from maybe 2 of you if you want to come off mute and tell us what has worked and what isn't working anymore, or feel free to drop it in chat as well. We'll have some awkward silence until someone comes off mute.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if everyone, I know that we went through this last week, so if you want to take yourself off mute, if you wanted to put it in the chat, don't be shy. We're all friends here.
So when you think of communication tactics, some of those could be social media, it could be e-blasts, it could be your website, it could be verbally talking to people, which, since we've all been locked down for the most part for 2 years, it's that face-to-face communication is coming back, as Jasmine's saying, having Zoom meetings. I'm curious if the Zoom meetings are working for people or if you'd rather the face-to-face. Like, what is the most impactful way of communicating for you within your role? Are you able to communicate as effectively with community members through Zoom?
Good
You
morning,
can
David.
also, go ahead.
Hey, Tracy, sorry. Hey, everybody on the call. I'm Maximino with Antelope Valley Partners for Health. I guess for us, one method that's been working is just engaging with the community on a personal level. Really, when they come in, how are you? Hear them out before we just go straight to, oh, how can we help you type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That way, we're able to really hear them out, see what is that they're, why they're visiting us, number one. And then that way we're able to tailor them on a personal level and get that connection that we need. But one tactic that hasn't been working for us is Zooms, like having Zoom calls, having people participate in Zoom activities hasn't been ideally as effective as in person. And so we are opening our doors. We have been opening our doors, and it's been a big success seeing a lot of people just coming back and getting back into the normal things like it used to be.
Nice. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I'm assuming most folks have a similar experience. Like, we want to be back in person. We want to be talking, but I think a lot of our tactics are still in the digital realm, right? We can't talk to everyone in person. So, a lot of the tactics and ways that we'll be talking about today are through just online platforms. But I think a lot of it comes down to strategic communications and thinking more intentional about what we're saying and who we're talking to and how we're talking to them. So those are the 3 big buckets we're going to be talking about today. So I'll just keep this moving. So I think the struggle
David,
is,
there was one other one in the chat.
oh,
Bridget,
yeah.
at time face-to-face communication, but it can be followed by an email to confirm that what was said or as a reminder.
Yeah, that's always great. That's kind of my rule of thumb too. If I have a in-person meeting or even a Zoom meeting, things can get lost, and then always following up over email. Someone else said the most effective communication tactic for me has worked in the past year to utilize reflective listening. Nice. Yeah, I mean, it's been harder to listen over Zoom, right? You think we're all here, but we get distracted when we're in front of our screens, right? And so it is, and that's the reality of it. I know I multitask while I'm on trainings as well, and so it's hard to stay focused, but that reflective listening and then offering and then pausing and then reflecting and then engaging before jumping in is great. And so I think the struggle is real. We've done a similar training just last week with 50 folks in another region of LA County. And a lot of people are struggling with communication, mainly because there's a lot of noise out there. When I say noise, that could be the media, it could be politics, it could be just other concerns going on in our lives. We are still dealing with COVID, the balance of mental health and getting out back in person versus staying at home. There's a lot going on, right? And so it's been hard. And so part of what we found what works is like really refocusing our energy as leaders, as individuals, whatever role you play at your organization, rethinking about how you communicate, and rethinking about your audiences and who you're speaking to. So we're going to be talking about audiences later and where your audiences are at, because that's where you should be most active, right? As a within your role. And so refreshing your brand is something that works. We won't talk about that much today, but some organizations are thinking about their own marketing and how they feel. Branding is all about how you feel and the how people interact with your organization, with your colors, with your fonts, with your marketing. We're seeing a lot of organizations think more intentionally about that and not just create templates on Canva, but really create more robust marketing campaigns so that they can connect with their audiences. And then leading with your values. I think this really helps. I think people are a little bit more open now compared to last year with sharing what their values are as an organization. I think there's a level of authenticity over the last years with everything our country's gone through. Like, we really value authentic communicators. It's all right to share feelings with people. It's all right to share more personal things and open up a bit, because we're all going through similar scenarios a lot if you start opening up about those. And then just do more of what works. Sometimes we don't analyze what works. And so we're going to be talking later about like what works for you. You should know what works, right? And so I know, again, everyone is at different roles in this training today, but if you don't play the lead role in your communications, meet with that person and talk about what's worked, because we can't keep doing the same thing over and over again. Or maybe you should if it works, but analyzing if it works and then moving forward. And again, if you're just joining us, feel free to drop in chat any questions you have, or I'm fine if you just come off mute and interrupt me for a good question or comment. So I'd like to just ask everyone, how strong do you think your brand is as an organization? Again, we're starting off big picture with your brand because it does impact your communications. So there's a lot of things that goes into your branding. I think most people just think about it as your logo. It's way more than your logo. It's the people within your organization that represent your department. It's your website, it's your marketing, it's how you talk about what you do. And so a lot of times, if these aren't the same, if they aren't updated, if they aren't current, that's going to impact your communications. And so we aren't diving deep into this now, but definitely think about how your own branding and marketing is, because if you're approaching someone for support in the community, if you're approaching a local business or an elected official, if you don't have a strong brand, it will impact your message on what you're asking for. And so that's really the point I want to make with that. I know this is this can be a lot to really think about your branding, and it might be something more than just thinking about it. It might be something you think about as a team, but really when someone approaches me for if they need a donation, I'm looking at their website and does it look good? Is it clear? Is their pitch to me clear on what they need support for? So we're going to be talking about pitch too in a little bit as far as your communication. And so just think about like your branding and is it confusing to an outsider? Because if it's confusing to an outsider, then it's definitely needs some refinement. So your pitch, I mean, a lot of people might have a different understanding of this word pitch. To me, this is your mission statement. This is whatever you're asking for. This could be how you describe your role. A pitch might imply that you're asking for something, and you probably are, but your pitch should be clear, right? And so this is kind of the heart of strategic communications, is having a very clear message. Usually we don't have time to go through this exercise, but a longer exercise would be to develop your pitch and to figure out like who has an effective statement. I'm sure some of you on this training could tell me what your mission statement is for your organization, but it probably isn't exciting. And hopefully that doesn't come across too judgy, but mission statements usually aren't exciting, right? And so your pitch should be telling me what you do, and it should be exciting and it should be clear. And so similar to the first page of your website, is it clear, right? Really the key is that clarity, because if it's not clear within a sentence or two, then it will be confusing to anyone. Whether you're talking to a community member just or maybe you're at church and you're talking to someone about your mission. Maybe you're talking to an elected official or a potential funder. That first sentence that comes out of your mouth is your pitch, and it just needs to be clear. And so the way we sometimes describe this is, if you were in a crowded bar, how would you describe your organization to me? Or if you don't go to bars, like if you were going to tell your neighbor what you do, how would you describe it to your neighbor? So part of this is using simple language. It's not going into too much depth on what you do, and it's being very clear. And so if you can imagine a bar or restaurant scenario, there's noise around you, there's a lot of commotion, you should be able to explain what you do pretty clearly and quickly. Same thing with your neighbor. You'll probably have more time to discuss it with your neighbor, but your neighbor might not be in the nonprofit world or some of the social services that y'all provide on this call. And so it needs to be clear to your neighbor. I had to do this the other day to a neighbor. We started sweeping leaves together in the street, and they asked me what I did, and I struggled, right? And so part of this is being ready to be clear with what your pitch is. And so are there any questions around this? Have people experienced this? If not, I'll move on. This is something that people usually nod their heads, and this is hard to do, but it's so important. And so this might not be the pitch for your whole organization. It might just be for you. That's what makes it a little bit easier if you're able to describe what you do. And sometimes not necessarily the what or the why. The why might be easier. The why gets into more of the passion for your work. Like why do you work wherever you work, and why is it what you do important? And that might be a little easier for you to share than what the whole organization does, right? Just another example. All right. So I'm gonna challenge someone to come off mute. Could someone read this quote out loud for me? Besides Tracy.
I can do that.
Thank you.
People will forget what you said. They will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel.
Nice. Thank you, Bridget. Raul, you get the next one. this is from Maya Angelou. This is really the essence of strategic communications, which might be a little like, what? It might be confusing. Like strategic communications feels very structured, right? But really it's about how you make people feel. And that's what it comes down to. So whatever that person is left with, their experience with you, that's what matters. They might not remember exactly what you do or even what you asked for, but if you made that person feel good, they're going to remember you for years. You know, I teach some courses at Cal State LA, and I've been teaching there for maybe 6 years now. And a student asked if they could introduce me to another student who needed some advice on something. And I said, sure. And they remembered who I didn't remember them. They didn't remember what class they took from me, but they're like, oh yeah, I remember you. You made us all feel good. And I was like, oh, that's the goal. And so hopefully this quote resonates with folks. But now we're going to get into more of the tactical side of strategic communications. So I'm going to first talk about the left-hand side with consistency and clarity. So we're going to talk about this on the next slide as well, but through social media, e-blasts, reports, events, and meetings, if you really think more broadly about your communication, there's a lot everyone is doing. It could just be your emails. You know, if you aren't in a role where you're making flyers for your organization, email might be your primary form of communication, right? And it might be asking yourself, is your email clear? Is your email signature clear? Can people get a hold of you easily, right? Or some questions to think about if email is your primary form of communication with folks. A lot of times people stumble with this, but it is doing some self-reflection, right? As a leader, as anyone on this call, to think about that clarity. Another form of strategic communication is partnerships. And I think this is something new as well, that we might not think too much as partnerships as being strategic, but I really think, I mean, everyone on this call is probably, I would consider y'all partners, right? Everyone works together. There's a close knit community in the Antelope Valley. Hopefully you're able to talk to each other openly and build partnerships. And so it's really thinking about those partnerships and leaning into them. I work with a lot of collaborative groups where partnerships and collaboration is one of their core values. And it's thinking about those partnerships and how do you support each other and what do you ask each other for? I mean, partnerships go both ways, right? And so I think I have a good friend that his kind of he tells himself a challenge every day to add value to someone's life every day. And that's what he does to his partners. He's a funder. And so it's like, how can he add value to the nonprofits he funds at the foundation he works for? And it's really nice to know that there's people out there who think that way. But create more authentic partnerships. It's a form of strategic communication. It's intentional. I know you can't partner with everyone, right? You might want to, but really think about who are the partners who will take you towards your goal, and how are you communicating with them? How are you treating them? What are you asking for? And what are you giving them in return? I think part of this is making sure that this is a reciprocal relationship. So it's not just asking for things, right? Strategic communication, you're strategically volunteering to help them as well, right? I think at least half this group works in the nonprofit world, and we always ask for things, especially if you're in the fundraising side of the nonprofit world. And so I think I would just challenge folks to think about strategically asking yourself, are you giving as well? The next is thought leadership. So I don't know if this is a new word for folks, but it's been around for a while. People are starting to think more about, like, I would consider everyone on this call as a thought leader. Usually we just put this title on the ED or the CEO, whoever leads the organization. But I like thinking of everyone as a thought leader in their own in their own sector, in their own bubble, whatever you do in your work. If you're running youth services for your organization, you are a thought leader on youth development and youth leadership. And so that is a form of communication. How are you communicating that on your own platforms, whether that's on your LinkedIn account, or whether that's on your Instagram, or whether that's just in your talking to your colleagues? And so really thinking about your thought leadership. If, you know, if we were going to dive deeper into this, it would be asking you to write more and to think more about like writing, usually at the leadership level, at the director or CEO or ED level, they should be writing. Those positions should be a bit more external facing, right? When we're talking about programmatic or administrative positions, they're a bit more internal. So thought leadership usually is a bit more external, to make sure people see them as a thought leader. And then this next one is brand ambassadors. So this might be new to folks as well, but I would consider everyone on this call too a brand ambassador for your organization, whoever you work for. You know, whether that's Best Start, you're a brand ambassador. You're an ambassador for the Best Start work. You should be able to say what you do for Best Start in a sentence. Best Start does a lot, so that's probably a pretty complicated answer. And so you're ambassadors for the work. If you're venting about the organization to others, that's out in the universe, and that impacts the brand of Best Start, right? And so just as an example, I know that doesn't happen, but like really it's thinking about what you're saying and what you're putting out into the universe as an ambassador of where you work, right? And so you can control some of those perceptions. As employees, we all work somewhere. Just think about how you control that perception of where you work. A lot of times people ask me, oh, is this a good place to work for? And even if someone internally says it is, I kind of say, I don't know. Unless I've worked there myself, I don't really have a true understanding of what it is, the internal culture of that organization. But as ambassadors of the work, you control like what you're saying and how you're explaining how it is that work environment is. So all of these are forms of strategic communication. All of these are little buckets, if you will, little gears that move forward. So I'll just pause here if there's any questions so far. Okay. All right. So this is going to go down a little bit deeper, right? These are even more clear tactics to being a strategic communicator. And one reason why we said we're all communicators, right? The goal is to become more strategic. You could replace the word strategic with intentional as well. So having intention with your words have a lot of power. And so really thinking about being more strategic is the goal with this training. Because if you can be more intentional with what you're saying, who you're asking for things, who you're speaking to, then you're going to be more effective in your communication. I know you have some upcoming trainings on relationship building and building partnerships. I mean, it all comes down to communication. I've led 3 nonprofits, and then that's why I lead this communications firm now, because I felt like at the heart of a lot of our issues in the nonprofit sector or social impact sector was communications. We don't know how to communicate. We're tied up in the passion of the work. We're passionate about making an impact, but we don't know how to communicate effectively. Yeah. So first off, be clear with the mission, with the vision of your organization. And this goes back to the pitch. This is all the pitch portion. So what's the primary goal? What's your goal? Is it to alleviate poverty, right? Is it to provide more after school support for students? Like, can you explain it quickly and clearly? Would be my question. And so if you're able to, like, you should be able to type it in chat. That's how clear it should be. And again, you probably have many goals, but you're going to have to, in your pitch, being a strategic communicator, you're going to have to prioritize those goals. So if you have 5 goals, you aren't going to share all of them with someone. You're going to share probably 1 or 2. Right? Our goal is to support youth who are in probation camps, or our goal is to provide arts and provide a creative outlet for youth who need it. So I'm just making things up, but be very clear with what your goal is. The next is know your call to action. So in my line of work, we call this a CTA, so a call to action. And so you should have a couple of these in your back pocket, if you will. You should have a couple call to actions ready, whether they live on your website, or whether they live on social media, or whether they're in your brain, so you could say them out loud. So a call to action is basically telling me, a potential supporter, how I can help. Right? If you're fumbling when someone says, "Hey, how can I support you?" That's not a good thing. And I don't want the default to be donate. Right? That's always the default in the nonprofit world, is give us your money. But there's other ways to support. And so they should vary based off of who you're speaking to as well. And so thinking about, I'll just throw out a lot of examples of call to actions. It could be volunteer, it could be donate, it could be share our post online, it could be share this open position we're looking for, it could be donate strawberries, because we're going to do chocolate dip strawberries for Valentine's Day and we need 500. Can you donate 100? Be specific with your call to action too, is even better than a general ask. And so having a couple call to actions ready is pretty critical for a strategic communicator. If you're talking, and again, this varies, if you're talking to your local council member up there, it could be very specific. Can you sign this letter of support? Can you come out to this event? Can your field rep give us a certificate for our promotoras? These are very specific call to actions that you should be confident in saying. And so if you know them already, that confidence will come across. The next one is telling your origin story, which might sound a little weird, but like, I want to know why. If I'm speaking to you and we're having a good conversation, and I want to know why you work where you do. This should be simple to answer, but to answer it clearly might take a little bit more work. And so ask yourself, why are you involved with what you do? If you run programs for Project Joy, what is Project Joy and why do you do that? Why do you empower youth and families? Because probably everyone empowers youth and families. So why, and sorry, I'm picking on Project Joy now, but why, does Project Joy do that better than others? Or what makes them specific at their work? And so getting down into a bit more detail is important for a good communicator. Because if you keep it general, that's easy. I'm challenging folks to get a little bit more deeper, and then more specific with what you're communicating. So we're talking about your origin story, on why you joined is important to know, or why you work for the organization you work for. Elevating needs and dreams is next. And so this is usually the easiest, like knowing the needs of the organization, knowing the dreams. The dreams is where you're going. And so in theory, if we're all working in the nonprofit space, social services, whatever you'd like to call it, there's an end goal, right? And I know there's so much going on in our world that needs fixing, but in theory, we're out of jobs when we're done with our goal, right? In 10 years, if we've accomplished our goal, we might be out of jobs and not onto something else. That probably won't happen, but like, we should know the end goal of the vision of that organization and the needs. That will inspire me to give whatever you're asking me for. And so part of being a strategic communicator is inspiring other people. So helping them understand the big picture vision is pretty important. And then knowing your stats. So some people are inspired by a story, and some people just need to know statistics. And so you should have, just like you have a couple call to actions in your back pocket, you should have a couple stats in your back pocket. And so an impactful stat to me would be not just that 500 people participated in your program. I want to know that 90% of those 500 participants were able to complete their college essay to a Cal State, right? And got accepted to college. And so not just your program participation numbers, I think that's the first level that we might know, like how many people. To me, that's impactful, but it's not as deep as I'd like you to go. It's like, really tell me the impact through numbers that your program is having. So if you combine all of these elements, you're going to get me to do whatever you want. And so that to me is as a strategic communicator, that's the goal, is to help move people forward to whatever cause you're working on. And so you need to know those stats. So I usually 2 or 3 is a pretty easy number. People don't need to know more than that, but I think we all know those personalities that just want numbers. And then we know those types of folks who are motivated by a single story. So even if you have a small organization that might be all volunteer run, it might just be a community group, you're still making a massive impact. So you should have a story ready and a statistic ready, because they go hand in hand. If you're able to have that story and able to have that statistic, we call it winning over hearts and minds. And so you're winning over the heart and you're winning over the mind with the statistic. I'll just pause here. Yes, Tracy, data is sexy. People love, if you're writing grants, you're probably putting a lot of this data into your grants. Some of us aren't involved in the grants on this call, and so, but you should still have, if you don't know any stats for your organization, this is a good note to learn a couple stats so I can be ready to share with folks a couple statistics on our impact, and not just that you serve X amount of people. Go a little bit deeper than that. Yeah, I should put winning over hearts and minds in writing. Right. I'm going to keep us moving. Some of this, when we're talking about storytelling, this might be a newer concept to folks, or you might have seen this in other conferences, is this idea of ethical storytelling. We also do a full hour training just on this. So this will be a pretty, just an overview of ethical storytelling. Excuse me. The goal with that ethical storytelling is making sure you have the permission if you're telling someone else's story. That's to put it as simply as possible. A lot of times in the nonprofit space, we might take pictures and then share pictures, and then all of a sudden, this person is like the campaign face of our whole organization. So the idea is, let's ask them for permission. Let's make sure they're telling their own story. On the previous slides, I kind of emphasized your own story. So as much as possible, tell your story of why you're working at the organization, instead of someone else's story. I do know we need to share other people's stories. You need to share participant stories. But the trend, and a good trend in the nonprofit space, is to making sure we have permission to tell those stories. Some organizations are going as far as giving stipends for people who share their story. If we're going to be fundraising with a participant story, they might receive some type of compensation. And I'm not talking about anything major, but it could be $100 Target gift card as a thank you, right? But acknowledging that we're using their story or their quote on our website, and allowing and giving and recognizing them, because some of these stories are harder to tell, right? If you're telling a story of how just the trauma they face that came out of foster care, the struggle that they've had in their life, they're exposing themselves and they're being very authentic. So I think part of this is making sure they feel heard and seen as well. So if you want to know more, you could take an ethical storytelling pledge. There's a link on this presentation we can share later. But that's because I think, a lot of old school not necessarily old, but organizations who've been around for a while usually lift up a lot of stories, right? And we use that emotion to raise money. And so it's important to just think a little bit more critically about that and how we're doing that, so it isn't hurtful to the people that we're telling stories for. I think a best practice that everyone probably does is signing a waiver. Like when you start participating in a program, you might sign a waiver that you can use their story. That's the very first step. That's more of a legal step, right? The next step on ethical storytelling is having just a conversation. So if you're actually going to use their story or their quote or their picture, just sitting down with them and talking to them about like making sure that's okay. I'll just pause here. I know some of you are probably reading this slide, but any questions around this so far? Does this resonate with folks?
Martin, you took yourself off mute. Oh, Martin has a question.
Yes, just was waiting for someone to add on, but I just want to make a comment. So part of my former role, which I still kind of covering while I transitioned to my new role as a language cultural specialist and inland regional, was covering public relations and communications. So basically part of the change that we implemented from last year was focusing on precisely in the stories, basically that aligns with the brand. I think it is an important concept that anything that you do aligns with your brand. You mentioned before, David, and I'll thank you for that, is about making sure that we understand that it's not just a logo, that is the whole concept behind it, from choosing the colors, choosing the message, and that the purpose aligns truly with what you want to do. So choosing those stories wisely definitely helps you deliver the message consistently. So just wanted to thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, this is a newer concept, I'll say. So it might take this might not impact everyone on this call, but if you play a more programmatic role, it might just be looking out for your participants and kind of asking directors or the fundraising team if they're using stories, just to make sure we have that permission, not just in writing, right, but also emotionally, and making sure we're checking in with those folks. All right, we have one more quote if someone wants to read this out loud.
I can read it this time.
Raul.
Okay. Hello.
Yes.
People share, read, and engage more with any type of content when it's shared through friends and people they know and trust.
Yeah. Thank you. This might seem obvious, but I just want to enforce that we all have friends. And usually we read the content of our friends, right? The friends we trust, at least. And then we go a step further and share it if you believe in it. And so part of this, the next phase we're going into is more of the platforms and where we're sharing content and where we're seeing it. And so what I'd like everyone to think about is, who are you speaking to? I know you want to speak to everyone, but it's prioritizing your audiences. And so I'm sure everyone wants to speak with donors, students, higher ed, funders, parents, school leaders, community leaders, your elected leaders. But when it comes down to it, you have to prioritize who you're speaking to if you're going to do it strategically. And it can be different, right? It could be different for a campaign you're working on. It could be different for every program. It could be different for the CEO versus the program director. But it's each individual person, if you're in the role of communicating, it's prioritizing who you're speaking to. Once you do that, ask yourself, where are they? Where are they at online, basically? I know at the beginning, we all would rather talk to people face to face and in person. The fact is, you can't do that with everyone, right? Some of these people you're just going to speak to over email or over Zoom or over social media. You're going to engage with them through an e-blast, a mass email newsletter. And so just think about where they are. They could be on a Facebook group. They could be on Instagram. They could be on another platform that isn't even mentioned. So it's first thinking about your audiences and where they and who they are. And now we're thinking about where where they interact the most so you can be there. So again, this is all about thinking more intentionally to communicate with probably people that you aren't communicating with now, or communicating with them more effectively. And so there's a lot on this slide. There's a lot of platforms out there. And I think this is where people get the most annoyed, because there are so many platforms where we live, right? Social media, you have Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, YouTube. There's plenty of others. Those are the main ones. I think some things that we probably all have in common is most organizations have a website, right? And that website should be clear. I've said that before, but to really making sure your website is very clear. A lot of people have different events, whether that's programmatic events or fundraising events. A lot of folks have an e-blast or an e-newsletter, whatever you call it. You have some type of mass communication where you're sending out emails. And most organizations, I think my assumption is most organizations are probably on Facebook, probably on Instagram, maybe on Twitter, maybe on LinkedIn. But again, you're thinking about where your audiences are at this point. You don't have to be everywhere. When we give similar trainings on all of these platforms, people get overwhelmed when we go through every platform. But your organization doesn't have to be on every platform. You should be where your audience is. I'll just say that again. You should be wherever your audience is. You should know who your audience is, and then you should be there. So if you're the director of development and you're raising money, you need to think about who your donors are and where are they. They might be on Twitter and LinkedIn. So those are the platforms you should be active on, right? If you're engaging youth, they might be on TikTok than Instagram. Probably more so TikTok. Or or they're texting, another form of communication. So you might need you might need to sign up for a platform where you can do mass texts to those youth, where youth aren't going to sign up for an e-blast, but they might sign up for a mass texting campaign to get text alerts when events come up or when college deadlines are. There's plenty of mass texting platforms that are very cost effective now. When they first came out, they weren't cost effective, and now they are. And so really think about your audience and where they are. Again, you don't need to be on all of these. We aren't going to talk much about email or phone calling, but that's a primary form of communication that we all do on a daily basis, right? On a daily basis, you're emailing someone, and you might be picking up the phone. I know a lot of us might prefer email nowadays, but like you might be picking up the phone and actually talking to someone. And so think about that too, and how you communicate with those folks. But the generational divide is real, as the chat is mentioning. But this all comes down to your audience and knowing them. And so if you work with multiple audiences, this might be more complicated for you, right? That means you're going to have to be on multiple platforms, communicating in different ways. You might have to use different language to describe things. So even if you have your pitch down on how you explain your organization, how you explain what AVPH does, if you explain that to an elected official, it's going to be different if you explain it to a cashier at Food for Less, right? And so those are just different audiences, or a youth, or someone on this call. Everyone's different and has different needs. So you're thinking about how you explain it a little bit differently. And this is a lot of work. I will just put it out there. It is but we can all do it. It's just sitting down and thinking a little bit more critically about how you communicate. So I'll just pause here. I can answer any questions about any of these. We aren't going into depth on too many of these right now, but if you have any quick questions, feel free to drop it in chat or come off mute.
Raul has his hand raised. David.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, hi. On marketing, we were at AVPH, we were lucky enough to have our own people be our marketing. We had a advocate team that was active most of the summer and into winter, where they were they were under a COVID grant, but they were out kind of promoting
Yeah.
AVPH. They were our marketing team basically. And it was really, really nice when I was part of it, when we showed up and everybody was, wow, AVPH is present. So, and we made them aware. So that was nice.
Yeah, that's great. I know COVID, or whether there was a lot of funds for outreach with COVID and also with the census, if folks received some census money a year or two before that for 2020. Yeah, I mean, it's important, and they were probably saying the same message. They probably had clear talking points when they're reaching out to the community. I mean, now that time is relatively over, like everything they learned still rings true, like being clear with what they probably had a clear call to action, whether that was go get your shot, or here's the resources you need. This is what you should be doing. It might just be sharing knowledge, not, but they had clear direction, which is what we should all have. I think the issue is we all get caught up in our jobs, right? We all get busy, and then we kind of put communications to the side. And so that's why I appreciate, everyone here just thinking a little bit more critically about how we communicate. All right, I'm gonna make everyone hungry if you haven't had breakfast yet, with some donuts. But sometimes, we do full trainings on social media too, but this is a slide we created to quickly explain all the social media platforms. So I'll let people read this. But it's a very simple overview about the platforms and how they're used using donuts. So I think there's some platforms in here that you might not think of as social media platforms. Like there's Spotify there, listening to a donut playlist, but that's a form of communicating, right? There's Yelp. Sometimes organizations have Yelp pages if you have a lot of participants. If you didn't know, anyone could start up a Yelp page, and so you might, if you do a quick Google search, you'll see if your organization has a Yelp page or not that you can claim. Pinterest, some of us joined Pinterest years ago when it was at its peak, but it's a nice platform if you create anything that might be picture worthy, or that might be like related to home or food or DIY things. Pinterest is a great platform to be on. But yeah, we just like letting this slide be here if there's any questions around social media. But again, to go back to the previous point, is think about your audiences and where they are at. So you don't need to be on everything on this slide, but you should be most active where those priority audiences are. So if you have six audiences, you might say, oh, I need to be on 6 different platforms to talk to them. But again, you're prioritizing them. So I would say prioritize your top 2 or 3 audiences, and then those are the platforms you're prioritizing internally. Because you're going to eat up a lot of staff time if you're going to be on 6 platforms, or you're going to do it. I'll just say the only word I can think of is half-assed. You're going to just do it at a basic level and not have great content on those platforms. So the goal is that you're providing great content that's authentic, you're providing resources for folks, and you're engaging them. You aren't just on there because you have to be on there. All right. So this is, we're towards the end of the presentation. I added a slide on LinkedIn if we had time, and because I do think this is one platform that, as professionals, this is almost a necessary platform to be on, whether you run programs or whether you run the organization or whether you're on the board of an organization. This is a platform where most audiences, I mean, even college students, right, are starting up LinkedIn profiles so that they can get jobs and they can be more connected. So I'll just share with you how I use LinkedIn. I mean, even though we're out and about and you might be sharing business cards. If someone gives me their business card, I'm connecting with them on LinkedIn and then throwing away their business card, right? And so LinkedIn for me as a professional has become that Rolodex of relationships where I look at it. I have time on my calendar every week to log in, to post, to browse around, to comment on friends and colleagues' items. And since I don't get out as much, I have 2 younger kids, and I kind of like staying at home. But to me, LinkedIn is a way of connecting with other people that I don't see. And it might not be as valuable as face-to-face interaction, but I can interact with 50 people in a week on LinkedIn, where in person I might just interact with a handful, right? And so I wanted to just briefly talk about LinkedIn because it is a platform that I think everyone on this call should be on. And I hesitate to say active. Active would mean you're posting and you're engaging on a weekly basis, but at least you're on and you have a built out profile so that if someone Googles you, your LinkedIn page will show up. It's not just a platform if you're looking for work, you have a LinkedIn profile. I think that's an old misconception. Is as a thought leader, going back to that word, you have the ability to create and manage your own brand. So as individuals, we don't have our own websites, right? But you do have an option to have a LinkedIn profile as a professional. And so it's just an opportunity to connect with other people. And as an organization, whether you know it or not, right when an employee says they work for you, LinkedIn creates a business page for your organization, like automatically. It doesn't, you don't need to approve it or anything. It creates a business page. And so it's also something else to manage as a nonprofit, like your business page. So I just wanted to leave this here. Again, I know we weren't gonna go into depth on all the different platforms today, but I did want to bring up LinkedIn because I do feel like it's a way, it ties into strategic communication, because every leader in the community is probably, every traditional leader, I should say, like elected officials, funders, media, heads of different organizations or businesses are probably on LinkedIn. And if you can't connect with them in person, LinkedIn is a good option to connect digitally. So any quick questions on LinkedIn that I can answer? If I ask for a raise of hands, I'm assuming probably this group is split 50-50. I'm sure some people haven't logged in years, probably forgot their password. Some people might have an active profile, but it isn't too hard to log in and look at it, you know, if at least once a month would be my recommendation, if even if you aren't using it actively, to at least look at it and log in. All right, so we're gonna wrap things up. Again, if you have any questions, put them in chat or unmute yourself. But I had just a closing question for folks, if everyone could think about this. What's one insight from this training or action step you'll take this month? So if is there something, you know, you remembered from the last hour or so that you could drop in chat, or what's one to kind of push you towards action? What is, or to be more strategic, what's one little step that you'll do as a result of this training? If you wanted to come off mute and share or drop it in chat, that'd be great. Nice. I'll just read some of these chat. Really work on an opening statement about what my org does in your own words, right? Know 3 key statistics. That's great. Update my LinkedIn. Good. Yeah, these are all very clear, right? Tell your story and elevator pitch. I like the distinction of the opening statement in your own words, right? I think a common approach is like, oh, memorize your mission statement. That doesn't do it anymore. I want to hear it in your own words. Learn 3 statistics. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. And if anything, if you can't think of something to do, and as someone said, think about what isn't working. Because if it isn't working, you probably shouldn't be doing it. I know communications, one reason we set it to the side is because it takes staff time. It takes time. And you have other priorities on your plate. But if you really think about what's working and what's not, a lot of times that will help free up time. And then if you actually focus on what is working, that will become way more effective. I love that you love the CTA, the call to action, if you don't remember that acronym. So having a couple of those in your back pocket as well, besides donate. Yeah. I try not to use the word, yeah, I know I've used the word simple multiple times during this training. One of my coworkers challenged me not to use that word, but that's what we need. Like, I need something simple to remember what you do. I'm not going to remember it if you make it complicated, even though I know it's way more in depth than you simplifying it. That is the most easy way to explain, really you could say getting down to the meat of what you do, or to the heart of what you do, could be another way of explaining it. And yeah, and I think Raul summed it up well, just to have that consistent and cohesive message for your organization. Because believe it or not, that'll impact other things. And so if you interact with the board at your organization a lot, if the board members are all going around saying different things, they could be confusing everyone, right? And so making sure, sometimes this might end with a messaging training for your staff, like making sure your whole team actually says the same thing. Or if you work at a massive organization, your department, making sure your department can be clear with how you describe your work. Nice. Martin is bringing up the social media channels, which ones to focus on. Yeah, so feel free to, Tracy will email the presentation. If you have other questions, feel free to email me. I'm pretty open, and I'm a good email communicator, so I'll email right back and answer any quick questions you have. But thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. A lot of food for thought. I learned so much. One of the reasons why I love the Academy. I constantly learn new things. So if we can give David either a virtual or an actual applause. Thank you so much for the presentation. Really enjoyed it. I'm going to just share a couple more slides here, and then I'll let you go. So yeah, thank you. Martin just said thank you, David. So another thanks from Wendy. And let me just share my screen, and then okay. And so can everyone, I'm going to ask, Raul, I can see you. Can you see my screen? Okay, great. So what we have is Group Site. So if you haven't already joined, Group Site is the platform where you can come together. We'll ask you questions, like David just asked a question about your experience. We're going to talk about the different modules as they come. You'll also be able to access any of the media that we place there. You can also talk to your fellow cohort members. So if you have gotten the email inviting you, all you need to do is accept it and put your picture up and start interacting. There's no cost to it. It's free of charge. So yeah, so if you've gotten that, just click accept and you'll be good to go, and you can share and interact with the other cohort members. Finally, I'm going to ask my colleague Stephanie to put our Linktree in. David talked about social media. Linktree is another great tool where it's exactly what it sounds. It's just a bunch of links. So if you've got one of those companies, organizations where you have like your YouTube, your social media, your Instagram, your Facebook, Linktree puts all the links in one place. So it's great. So we invite you to follow us because we do have our YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. And again, this Academy was brought to you by Best Start Antelope Valley. So that is what you're following and what you're getting updates about the Best Start program, which is a First Five of LA initiative. And finally, next week, we have Children's Bureau's own Kimberly Garrett. So she will be speaking about relationship building. So that will be next Tuesday. And again, you don't really need to write anything down. you'll be getting that email a week out, a day before, and an hour before the module will start. So you're good to go. So it'll be next Tuesday. And again, finally, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Hope that you're getting something out of the Academy, and happy Valentine's Day, and we'll see you next Tuesday. So thank you so much, everyone.